What's up YouTube? So today we are plastering this garden room for a local company in Brighton, East Sussex, the RA Group. Should be a piece of cake. Always nice when they do a decent job of the boarding. Enjoy the video. Ceiling done. Just under 2 bags, but ceiling and 2 walls are on. Ta-da! And you just love it when it's just the right amount. Win. Now time to spat this down, flan it off with the Raffina plastic easy grip, whatever the hell it's called. These things are amazing, lifesaver. pretty sure I've got enough plaster on this ceiling to lay the whole room down again. Ta-da! That is a lot of plaster. Yum. Not sure what we could do without these plastic spats. Probably have to be good at your job if you didn't have one. Saves so much time. Very important when you're using these and you're flattening off that you go in both directions. Admittedly, what I should have actually done is gone that way first, so across the light, because what you find is if you do that the second time, certainly on the second coat, you run the risk of waves. Admittedly, the boarding here is fantastic, so it's highly unlikely that will be the case, but on the second coat I will skim 90 degrees to where the door is, which is there, so there's no chance of any waves. But for the sake of the flat on the first coat, we will go this way second. In case it's not obvious in the video, I think it's 3.7 by 3.3, something like that, so it's quite a nice easy size. And it's a first coat is 2 bags, and then we'll lay it down with one. If you're going to spat side to side, which you don't have to, certainly on the first coat, but if you're going to, it's very important that you tip the spat at a slight angle. And the reason is, if there's any waves in the wall, if the spat is like that, it will follow the waves. Where if it tips slightly to the side, it takes a lot of the waves out. So as going across, just tip it sideways, and it stops any risk of it following any waves. The company that board this, RA Group, happen to be very good at boarding, so it's a pretty easy job, to be honest with you. Unfortunately, there is no doors in yet, so I've got to be pretty careful where the door is, because obviously you're going to just have a breeze hitting that wall, so I've got to pay attention to that doesn't dry too fast. Right, and second to last thing to do, corner trowel, or as I call it, twitcher. And it's not that it needs it at this point, but it's just a quick way of filling in the corner. You don't want to go overkill with this because you actually dig it out. So just looking to fill it into the tape all the way around. What I like to do once I've done this after I've cleaned the switcher off, I like to just get the spat again and then just straighten up the corner. So put it into the corner and just straighten it up. So this is at the point where you want to try and start getting the foundation of the plastering work as flat as you can. The better your flattening is, the nicer your top coat will look, because if it's rough, you get what are called shadow lines coming through the plaster, which will look terrible once it's dried. So this is the hit. So that's just 2 bags. It's on pretty thick, to be totally honest with you. It's probably at least a good 2 mil, if not a little bit more on the first coat. So it's just under 2 bags, just under 2 bags on the first coat. So it would be about a bag, and probably the tiny little bit that was left, in the bottom bit on the second coat, because the first coat is always about twice the thickness of the second. What I'm going to do is just tidy up the edges and then start mixing up that second coat. Just a small tip with regards to cleaning out the bucket. Between the first and second coat, we don't tend to clean the bucket out. You can see there's the excess of the rubbish that we scraped off. It's a very good reason why we don't clean it up. Now you can chuck the old gear away, but if you leave the bucket dirty, it tends to just set the gear off a little bit quicker. That said, is a very important warning with regards to that. You only want to slosh the bucket around at the point when you're mixing up. If you clean the side of the bucket, leave the dirty water in there, but you don't knock up for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, by the time you knock up, that will send the gear off within probably 5 to 10 minutes. Whereas if you just clean it at the point where you're mixing up, it won't massively affect how long you've got, but it just tends to get the gear to set a little bit quicker, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour faster. And you're only cleaning out the bucket once. And you're also not getting the sludge in your dirty water bucket sitting in the bottom of your dirty water bucket for too long. So it's just a small tip that it does make a little bit of difference on the end of the day. So just for information purposes, for 1 bag of plaster, you need one of the standard black buckets that you can buy pretty much anywhere. You need 1 and a bit of water. That's on the assumption that you're filling the water up just about 1 inch below the top. So if it's just about 1 inch below the top, you'll need just a little bit more for 1 bag. Now obviously, we're going to put a little bit more than 1 bag in, so it'll be about 1.25 buckets, something like that, to knock up what we need. So same again, going to be hitting it with the second coat now. As said already, we've pretty much knocked up within 5-10 minutes of finishing, and it is pretty much perfectly ready to go. So it's exactly the same as the first coat, so we'll put it on time lapse so it moves a little bit faster for you. And right, so that has had its second coat on. So, as mentioned, that was just over a bag to lay all of this down. Then there is about that much left in the bucket. So worked out just about right. So now what we will do is run the spat or the speed skim over it just to flatten it off.
Okay.
Oh, cheers, thank you.
Do I leave this out here? Or?
That's all right, I can have it. Lovely, thank you.
Okay. Whoops.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Cup of tea. So what we're going to do now is going to use the corner trowel, or the twitcher as we call it, just to fill out the line that you can see here. It's just not particularly tidy, so we're just looking to fill it out best we can at the early stage. Not looking to push too hard, just enough to fill it in. You can see a little bit over here, still a bit gappy. So just fill it in and then we'll leave it. Some over here, into the corner. On the gear. And then down the side. Right. There we go, so that's nicely filled out. Now what you'll notice is that it leaves a line all the way along. Now if you leave that too long, that is a pain to get rid of. So what we're going to do is we're going to run the Raffina speed skim against the line, the ceiling line and the wall line, just to strain it out. So into the corner, just pull down into the corner and just go all the way along, filling it out like that. Into the corner. And in the corner. So now if we were to have a look at it, we don't have that line anymore and it looks a heck of a lot straighter. You have to bear in mind that it's got a ultra wide lens, which is what the curve looks like. Well, it looks like there's a curve on it, but it just straightens it out a lot more. So it's a little bit harder to see with the ultra wide lens, but I can assure you it's nice and straight. After you've twitched it at that point, really want to leave it for quite some time. Just move the camera, there we go. Want to leave it for quite some time. We'll run the spatula over it again just to take out some more of the lines. Now this particular customer likes a sponge for us to sponge float it, so we will do that and we'll show that in a moment. But with regards to the twitcher, once you've filled out those corners, really you don't want to have to twitch it again until getting towards right at the end. The reason being is because if you keep twitching when it's wet, you'll do two things. You'll dig out the plaster in the corners, but you'll keep getting that line come through. And what you end up doing is you end up taking the plaster out of the 4 inches or so at the top, so it ends up dipping in. So once you've filled that corner out and then you've flattened it with the speed skimmer or your trowel, just leave it alone until right at the very end, and then you'll get those nice crisp corners which don't look wavy. So we'll come back when we're sponging it and see what it looks like then. So I must admit, shamefully, I have already sponged it and flattened it. The long and short of it is I happened to be on the phone at the time, so I didn't bother videoing it. But this is the stage that we are at currently. So this has now had its 2 coats. It had a flatten, and then I sponged it and then flattened it almost immediately. So currently, this is how it looks. How well that's coming out. That's fairly flat. Now it's at this point where it's pretty much dry to touch, which should then be good to wet trowel. So when you sponge a wall, essentially what it does, it cuts out the need for doing 2 wet trowels. So because it's been sponged up, flattened, it's at a pretty good standard now. 95% of the misses are all gone now. So what we'll be doing is doing 1 wet trowel pass over this, and then probably just a dry trowel or a plastic trowel just to finish it. So we will see how it comes out. So a bit of water on it. So on this trowel here, although it's pretty dry, we'll probably get a reasonable amount of fat coming off this. So this is fat. You don't want to keep this on the trowel for too long. So wipe it on the edge of the bucket, get rid of it. What you'll find is, especially if you don't sponge this and you do 2 wet trowels, the first wet trowel you do, you'll find that the fat coming off it is an awful lot thicker. You want to make sure you take that off within a couple of trowels, otherwise what you'll find is it'll end up tigering the walls and the ceilings if you leave the gear on the trowel. So, bit of water, brush the corner, and then gently into the corner and just pull back, applying quite a lot of pressure because the wall, the plaster is pretty dry. And a brush, and then same again, take off the excess. So on a previous video we mentioned about, it was a discussion about between stainless steel and carbon. One of the reasons why we love these trowels so much is because of how sharp they get, and they can get a finish just as good as a flexible trowel with not much wearing in. I don't know how well that's coming up, but you can see that is, I don't know if you can see where I've been, but the finish that you get on a carbon steel trowel, we feel, is far more superior, which is why we tend to use them. Although they do nick terrible, and this one has got an awful nick in it. But because the trowel's not opened up fully, it doesn't show the nick too much. So it's about 30 degrees, the trowel, and I'm pushing pretty hard to really push the plaster flat. Really want to make sure you work in those corners so they're nicely filled out. You can see that's the first half of the ceiling troweled up, so I don't know how well that shows up. I'm saying the corners are pretty much all filled out now. So hopefully you can see where the new versus the old is. And then what we'll do is just repeat that process for all the walls and the ceiling. So we're going to switch this over to time lapse as it's a pretty boring process. Okay, so that has now had one wet trowel over it, and it will be its only wet trowel. So you can see now this is where it's at. So it's gone for about 2.5 hours, something like that. But to give you an idea, this is sort of the finish that you can achieve. So what we're now going to do is we're going to run the corners. You remember earlier in the video I said about not doing the corners until the right towards the very end. So you can see now they are much drier. So we're just going to run the twitcher in the corner like so. It just neatens up the edges. You can hardly anything off it. Hopefully wet the twitcher up. So wetting the twitcher up will just stop it from tearing the plaster. Then push it down. So I'm pushing pretty hard in the corners. It just cleans it up nicely. So they are nice and clean, and they're also perfectly straight. So what I'm now going to do is we're just going to run a plastic trowel with a tiny little bit of water on it just to do a final pass over it, and then that'll be done. So the plastic trowel that we like to use is this one from Nela or Nella. We have tried several. We've tried the Rafina one as well, which is very good. The reason we prefer this one is the blade is thicker, so it doesn't flex quite so much, it doesn't crack. The amazing thing about these is they give a almost perfect matte finish, but also if you nick the trowel, it's an awful lot easier just to sand them down and get them back to how they were when they were brand new. So we're going to do a tiny little bit of water, run it over the walls and the ceiling, and then that will be it, it will be finished. So I'll just set the camera up so that you... And then with the plastic trowel, this is what it looks like. What we'll do at the end is I'll take a photo of it and put the stills at the end of the video so you can see what it looks like on a picture. That is now done. So that is the first set completely done. So that's from about 10 o'clock till just after 1. So let's say I'll put some stills on once the set's finished at the end of the video, so you can see the final product. There's obviously not an awful lot left to do. Obviously in an ideal world you'd want to do opposites. I didn't in this case because I haven't taped the doorway, and I couldn't be bothered to do the beads this morning. So it's just that and that to finish, which will probably be about a bag and a half, something like that, to put it on. And then we'll be done. So I will time lapse that so you can see that done. So what we're going to do for the second set, because it's such a small set, we're going to use some half time. I'm also going to do something slightly different as well, just so those watching can see the difference between the two finishes. We're actually going to one coat these two next walls. Again, it's such a small area, so what we're going to do is we're going to knock up a bag and a half of plaster and then just put one sachet in. Now, to shorten it by, I think it's half an hour on the set, something like that, half an hour to an hour that it speeds it up. You're supposed to put 2 of these per bag. I don't want it to go off that fast. I do want it just to go off a little bit quicker because I don't want to be sitting around for the next 3 to 3.5 hours. Now, there's a lot of discussion over whether you should one coat or not. Now you can see on the first set we've 2 coated, no issues whatsoever. But basically, the principle behind using a one coat system is the idea is that you apply both the thickness of both coats in one pass. So you need to be able to apply 3 mil of plaster, or essentially the thickness of the skimming bead, in one pass. If you struggle with this, the easiest way to do it is actually apply it on your wall as your normal thickness and then go over it straight away again. The idea is apply it to about 3 mil, 3.5 mil, then you rule it straight, let it pull in, and then you spray it down and sponge it, and what it does, it reactivates that top layer, that millimeter. Then you flatten it down again with the spatula, and that essentially gives you the effect of 2 coats because you've reactivated that that top layer, so they're essentially going off at an ever so slightly different rate. Some people aren't going to like it, and it's very, very important. You cannot one coat unless you use a sponge. That is absolutely vital. If you don't do that, it will look shocking. But I'm going to use this system for this second set as it's so small. Again, the customer isn't bothered. They know that occasionally we use this method, but just so you can see the method in action and the finish you can get using a one coat. So if we mix in the half time, and then what we'll do is we'll mock up a bag and a half of plaster. So let's do that. So you might be wondering, well, what is the reason for one coating? Why would you choose to use it? Well, there are a few advantages. The first one obviously being that you're only mixing up once, and also if you get the thickness right, you're only applying it in one go. So in that respect, it's a little bit faster. The set time tends to be a little bit quicker, probably about half an hour to an hour shorter than if you were to 2-coat the plastering. So the question really is, then why wouldn't you always one coat? Well, there are some good reasons not to use it, and which is why we don't often use it. So generally, if you are one coat plastering, you can't get anywhere near as much on because you're putting it on thicker. When you start knocking up, I mean, say these walls here, that was about a bag and a half. The maximum I'll attempt on a one coat is actually 3 bags. Which is essentially the equivalent of laying on with, or roughing on with 2 bags and then laying down with 1. Trying to do any more than 3 bags, the issue is by the time you get to the bottom of the bucket, the gear is almost useless. So it doesn't have that limitation. The other reason as well is that there is something very nice about being able to, when you're 2-coating, get most of the wall straight on that first coat, and then if there's any other issues, then you've got that second coat to really straighten any last final little bits out if the walls aren't fantastic. With one coating, you really have to be able to pull all of the discrepancies out in one go, which is often why we don't use the method. However, in walls like this, where the boarding has been done very well, the walls are very flat, there isn't really any issues. I'm doing it now so you can see the difference in the finish, but also it's now 2 o'clock. don't particularly want a particularly late day, so it's useful for me to be able to use it now. So they're kind of the pros and cons. You'll always get some people that love it, some people that hate it. The truth of it for me is that one of the best plasterers I have ever seen only ever one coated. Even on reskims on blue grit, he could still get an incredible finish, one coating and sponging. So the reality is the method of applying the plaster has changed along with the tools. You get a lot of people that say it's not proper plastering, it weakens the plaster and all this rubbish. To be totally honest with you, I have worked down in London where they have plastered entire blocks of flats, hundreds and hundreds of flats, one coating, no issues whatsoever. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't see any issue with it whatsoever. In the right place, it works very, very well. And it's just a different way of plastering. You know, you could almost argue it's a little bit like those who have a problem with using push fits for plumbing instead of soldering. You know, the idea is push fits almost make everybody a plumber. Well, one coating and sponging, you know, makes plastering a heck of a lot easier, and it takes a lot of the skill out of it, and I think that's why some people don't like it. But with regards to finish, well, you'll see at the end, the finish is just as good as two coat when used, you know, in the right circumstances. So it's good to know how to use both. We use both from time to time. It's not our go-to, but it's certainly useful to know how to use it. Okay, so unfortunately the video that we were using for recording this is pretty much useless. Sadly, the homeowner came in, so couldn't really properly use the video, sadly. But basically, the point where we're at is we've essentially applied the plaster on the walls in one coat. So you'll see on the plaster it's on very thick. And essentially what we've done is we've applied the thickness of the two coats in one go. I did actually have a bit of extra, so what I've done is I've just gone over it again twice. And what you'll find when you're doing one coat plastering, so it's very important that you have a speed skim or a spat or whatever. We use the Raffina one, as mentioned. You need one of those because you need it to be able to rule the gear, the plaster straight, otherwise you will get waves in it. But what you'll find is because it's on so thick, you'll actually have to rule it twice. So you flatten it off once, give it 5-10 minutes, and then rule it again once it's picked up a little bit. Then you'll get a much better flatten and more like what you are used to seeing when you're two-coat plastering. So we're going to get to that point, so rule it again, and then we'll catch up when we need to sponge it. Okay, so we're now at that point where we're going to look at sponge floating the one-coated wall. So this has had one very thick coat on. I actually applied it twice, mainly because I had more left over. But as you can see, it's got the thickness of two coats. Now the consistency you're looking for, how well it's going to show on the wall, is that it needs to feel like it's a little bit greasy. So you want to be able to slide your fingers over the top of it, but it shouldn't dig through to the plasterboard. So if you're finding you're pushing it and it's digging in and it's going almost to the board, it's too wet. But if it's just a little bit slimy on top and it still can move, so the top surface still can slide about but it's not digging in, that's about the right time to sponge it. So I'm going to be honest with you, my large sprayer, the big hose lock that we have, unfortunately I broke it a couple of weeks ago. I trod on the pole and unfortunately it's broken, so I haven't replaced it. However, the homeowner's hose is literally outside. So rather than spraying it with one of those little 2-litre bottles, I'm actually going to use the hose. So, wouldn't it be nice if you could get a hose this close to the job every time? But with this, obviously, if you are going to end up using hose, which, to be honest with you, I cannot think of any other occasion where you do this unless you were plastering a garden room like I am right now. If you are, you're going to want to make sure it's on mist. If you're going to use one of the sprayers, which I have no idea where mine is, the one, it was probably in the truck. A bit of a golden rule, also just to help you work out if it's dry enough, is that it wants to be on a relatively light haze on the wall, not the finest setting on those hose locks, but a reasonably light hose, but at about a foot, it shouldn't leave, the water shouldn't leave any indentations in the plaster. If it's doing that, chances are the plaster is too wet, so just leave it a little bit longer. And what you're looking is just for an even film across the wall. So I'm going to apply that now. Because this is a mist, I have to put a reasonable amount of water on. And then, sponge float I'm using today is one by Rafina. Going to be honest with you, I personally think the Rafina ones are the best. Very, very important though, you need a medium sponge. Do not buy the blue fine one, that will be rubbish. Rafina do one which is called medium soft, but they are as rare as hen's teeth. So if you can find medium soft, that's the one you want to go for. But at very least, medium sponge. We do have a very large one. This one isn't, unfortunately. This is only the 11-inch one. I will say though, if you've got a brand new sponge, they are a bit rubbish to start with. And the way you want to hold it is you want to treat it almost like it's a trowel. So what I mean is, you want to have it slightly open, like that, when you're sponging over. Now, ideally, you want to leave it so that the water's pulled in a little bit. What you don't want is loads of surface water, which is currently what I have at the moment. There's a lot of water on there. However, I want to go home, so I'm just going to sponge it anyway. So the reason why, if you get a lot of surface water, what you'll have to do is you'll just have to go over it a couple of times just to work it in a bit. Now, the best method for sponging is actually a figure of 8 motion. But unfortunately, because this is a brand new sponge, if you were to put it flat on the wall to get a figure of 8 motion, what ends up happening is it ends up sticking. It ends up sticking on the wall, and you also get loads of build-up against the edge there. When the sponge is a bit older, then you can put it flat to the wall, but while it's brand new, you want to treat it like it's a trowel. So just have that slight angle. And like I say, although figure of 8 motion is ideal, all you're trying to do now is activate the top surface of the plaster. That's all you're trying to achieve. So, run down the side. When you're doing the corners, you do want to have the sponge flat, just to try and straighten it out a bit. So again, across the top. We're not looking to push too hard, because if you push it too hard, it makes it very difficult to get rid of the sponge marks. Nice. Don't worry about brushing up against the set you've done before. It will wash off. Right. So, get rid of said sponge. Now, what you're looking to try and what you're looking for, trying to achieve, is how well that's showing up. You want to make sure that there are no areas missed, and I can actually see I've got an area that's missed here. So, and things like this here, that you want to try and take that out with the sponge now. So unfortunately mine's soaking wet, so take the water out of it, and then you just want to go over the top of it, and then just try and take that nick out. There you go, now it's gone. It's gone. Go away. You just want to make sure there's one there. Just take that out. And what you're basically looking for is an even sponge all the way across. A little bit of a miss there. Okay, so the point you're now looking at where you've then got to get rid of the sponge marks, the easiest way to know the right time is essentially you want the initial shine, so this bit here, to disappear. So where you've got surface water sitting on the wall where the sponge marks are, that's basically what you want gone. So once it just starts to dull up a little bit, so give it a couple of minutes, then that initial water that you sprayed on will have pulled in, and then you can spat it flat. But you'll see here that it is just the top layer which has been sponged. The actual main layer of plaster touching the board hasn't been disturbed. And that is how you create that second coat effect. By putting it on thick, the bit against the board dries faster. Bit against the board dries faster, and then it's just that top layer which has been activated. So we're going to give it a few minutes, and then we'll catch up once I've spatted that flat. So unfortunately, I think I might have forgot to press the play button on the video where I was troweling up the sponge floated wool. But essentially what I did on the, so we only did one wet trowel, which was a cross trowel, and then just run over it a couple of times with the plastic. But I don't know how well that you can see that on the video. You can clearly see it's come out pretty nice, and the other one, I don't know how well that's showing up. So you see these two walls here were one coated, and then the ceiling and these two walls here were two coated this morning. So really it's worth asking yourself, well, why did I bother doing one coat this afternoon? Well, I started that about 1:30, and I've cleaned up, and it's about 4 o'clock now. The actual set took about 2.5 hours from start to finish. I did put a little bit of the half time in as well. So it did speed the set up quite a bit. And to be totally honest with you, you wouldn't know. It's on just as thick, the finish is just as flat, it's come out absolutely lovely. And the customer, the builder, RA group, will know I'll be pleased with it. So thanks for watching. I'll put a few stills of the final project at the end of the video so you can see how the whole thing came out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.